You'll get a notification that we're streaming.
I got it.
Okay, and then I'm going to go ahead and hit start webinar.
Okay, so, and should I go ahead and start the introduction?
Give it a little bit, let people come in, and I'm going to turn off my mic and all that.
Okay.
And yeah, I'm going to go ahead and start.
Okay, good afternoon. I'm Laura Miller, and I'd like to welcome you to today's talk. It's one of the events sponsored by the Eiichi Shibusawa Seigo Arai Endowed Professorship in Japanese Studies and UMSL Global at the University of Missouri St. Louis. So we're very grateful today to have Zach Davison here as our speaker. He's an award-winning translator, writer, and scholar who focuses on things such as manga and Japanese folklore. A few of his many publications, and he'll probably mention a few also, include Yude, the Japanese Ghost, published by Chin Music Press in 2015. And for all you cat lovers, Kaibyo, the Supernatural Cats of Japan, first published in 2017, and then now in its second edition with a different publisher. So that shows you how popular that book is. In his writing, Davison is always careful to provide historical and cultural context and significance of the supernatural beings he introduces to Anglophone audiences. His professional translation work includes translations of manga luminaries, in particular his translation of Shigeru Mizuki's Showa History of Japan, for which Davison received a few notable awards. So please join me in welcoming Zach Davison today to talk about Amabie, Pandemic, and Pantheon. Thank you.
All right. Hello, everybody. Is my PowerPoint up? We can see it all?
Yes.
Okay, awesome, fantastic. So thanks for coming up. We got a lot of history to go here, like a couple of thousand years of history to go through. So I'm going to go ahead and jump right in. Once again,
wait a minute, I forgot to mention. So after Zach finishes, if you have questions, or even throughout the talk, use the Q&A button to write your questions, and I will select some at the end. Sorry to interrupt.
No, not at all. And yeah, please do. I love hearing people's questions, and it lets me know that you were interested in what I had to say. So I really appreciate any questions you have. So I said I am a manga translator. I translate the works of the folklorist and manga artist Mizuki Shigeru, as well as stuff like A History of Japan and Manga. I just recently did this work on strange Japanese yokai. I write my own books as well on Japanese folklore. That's really my focus and my passion. So today we're here to talk about Amabie. Amabie, this is kind of fun because I put this research together. I started doing the research on Amabie back in 2020, like a lot of people did, because it was this interesting phenomenon that was going on at the time, with the understanding that it would be ephemeral, but like, 4 years later, 3 years later, we certainly still wouldn't be talking about COVID and Corona, right? It'd be over by then, but no such luck. It's still going on. It's still an ongoing pandemic, and so it's still a relevant topic. Amabie itself, I'm just going to give you this brief timeline of Amabie here. So in January 16th of 2020, there was the first confirmed coronavirus case in Japan. January 30th, the first Amabie tweet happened from an account called Yokai Daishuku, but it didn't really gain any traction. In February 3rd, the Diamond cruise ship quarantined in Yokohama Harbor. February 13th had the first coronavirus death in Japan. By February 26th, all sporting and cultural events were canceled. By February 27th, all schools were canceled. And then by February 27th, an artist whose name was Orochido, who specializes in yokai scrolls, they sent this Amabie twist that really kicked off the Amabie phenomenon. So the very first tweet, this one here, this is actually the oldest Amabie tweet that I was able to investigate. And I like to say that with a lot of the stuff that I'm going to tell you, understand that the internet is often ephemera. So I did my best and thorough investigation and recording of this at the time. But things do change. The internet changes quickly. People can delete tweets. So it's as accurate as I was able to determine. January 30th, this Mizuki Shigeru fan account, Yokai Daihuku, sent this tweet basically saying that 150 years ago, a yokai called Amabie appeared in the Sea of Kumamoto Prefecture. Half human, half fish. It was said during a pandemic, share its image and you'll be instantly cured. I hope a yokai like that appears now with the novel coronavirus spreading. Then they followed up with this tweet here that I have on screen saying, by the way, this is what Amabie looks like. If you pray, you won't be afraid of coronavirus or influenza. And I think it's interesting that they mentioned specifically coronavirus or influenza, because when this first tweet came out, we really didn't know, they certainly didn't know the scale of what was going to happen with the coronavirus. It was thought that it might be just about as frightening as influenza. Now, this tweet here really didn't have much traction. It had 22 retweets and 61 likes, and it kind of just, its own followers saw it. This tweet here on February 27th, this artist named Orochido, he specializes in printed yokai scrolls. He sent this tweet here saying, a certain virus is spreading with terrifying speed among the yokai. One said, in times of plague, draw my image and share it as protection. This yokai is called the Amabie. So Orochido posted this tweet, as well as with a picture of the scroll that they had on sale. Orochido has many different scrolls of many different yokais, one of which existing in their catalog already was their Amabie. This one had a pretty good traction. It got about 670 retweets, about 916 likes. It's not bad, but it's certainly not what one would consider to be viral. So it's more like semi-viral. And I like to think of this as kind of like the snowflake that started the initial avalanche. And I think you should also note that Orochido certainly was not attempting to kick off any sort of social, phenomenon. He wasn't encouraging other people necessarily to make their own Amabie. He was, in fact, attempting to, market and sell this awesome scroll that was already in his catalog or in their catalog. Following up to Orochido's tweet was this one here by Kitano Yokaiten. Now, Kitano Yokaiten, they actually is a group account that represents a annual yokai-themed group exhibition that's held in Sapporo and Hokkaido called the Northern Yokai Exhibition. Orochido is actually a member of that group, and they put on an annual yokai exhibition. I thought this one was really great. This is what I think is the first original Amabie art that was produced in basically, referencing Corona itself. It's pretty impressive. They managed to pull out this 4-panel comic in just a few days. It's basically a retelling of the Edo period Amabie's first appearance. We have here in 1846, this light appears off the shore. A government official goes out to investigate. A strange bird-like, fish-like creature appears. It has 3 legs, it has a beak, and it does what Amabie does, and it speaks its prophecy. So it says that for the next 6 years, there shall be a bumper crop that will be followed by disaster. However, if you share my image, this disaster can be averted. The strip also included a little picture of the original Amabie Koarabon, and it was a pretty popular tweet. That followed up in February 29th by what I think is the first Amabie really, I guess not fan art necessarily, because the previous one was a little bit, but they were a professional account. So Aya Metal-chan, they post this image actually of art that they had made previously in 2017. So they say, oh, I also drew Amabie in 2017 as an omikuji illustration. So I'm going to repost this with prayers. This is then followed in February 29th by what I think is the oldest version of the official Amabie hashtag. This count Akashige posts once again in response saying, Amabie power, let's fight the disease. And now we're starting to actually start to build a sort of social movement around Amabie, right? The first ones, Orochido, he's trying to sort of like basically sell a scroll. The next one has a vested account in yokai. And now we're just starting to get people posting various Amabies. In March 2nd, this is, as far as I can tell, the first English language tweet that references Amabie, but doesn't actually say Amabie. This is from Matthew Meyer. He's also does a yokai art as well as runs yokai.com. He does a general post sort of about the Yogenju, the various beasts of prophecy. We'll talk about them a little bit later. So he posts this, but this is really the kicker right here. So on March 3rd, this count, Yomi Seidori, they posted the original Quaraban of the Amabie with a short description of it. And this one here gets 34.5 thousand retweets and 42.5 thousand likes. So this one just takes off and goes actually viral. From this moment on, once this Quaraban is posted, with Twitter just starts exploding with Amabie art, right? So with each successive post, more and more people, they become aware of Amabie. They like this idea of doing their little art form. Amabie starts to appear in everything from sculpture to felted creatures to simple line drawings to fully done paintings. On March 1st, there were 28 tweets that referenced Amabie. By March 4th, there was 1,000. By March 15th, there were 46,000. That was really the peak.
Wow.
And from then on out, there was almost probably 10 to 20,000 Amabie tweets every single day, going all the way down through June 2020, as Amabie just caught like fire. This is also reflected in, let me see here, click on. This is reflected in the Yahoo metrics. So Yahoo metrics say that basically there were about an escalating of 200 tweets going up to 1,000 tweets, and then the following day going up to 23,000. So Amabie just spread across the internet. And I always thought that this was really fascinating as someone who studies folklore to watch it happen, because in one of the things about folklore is this idea of transmission, right? That's sort of what makes folklore. Like if I tell a story, I just told a story. But if I tell a story and then the person that heard that story then goes and tells that story to other people, and then those people go tell that story, that is the lore of the folk. That is how transmission is done. And we got to sort of watch this happen in real time on the internet, watching as the story of Amabie transmitted. And with the power of the internet, they were no longer limited to who got to overhear it, right? It was just escalating globally, day by day by day. This massive tweet of the Amabie went out. This one here is one of my favorite cartoons. I just thought it was really funny because I'm going to post it up here. I really liked it. It's basically this guy walking by and the Amabie pops up and the Amabie gives this little prophecy. It's like, oh, share my image and avert the pandemic. And the guy's like, yeah, you're actually a little late. We're already in the middle of a pandemic right now. So, and the Amabie gets embarrassed and tries to like shoot back in the ocean because it realized it came too late. And he's like, hold on. Let me take your picture anyways and share it around. So I just like this cartoon. As the Amabie phenomenon is just like spreading across social media, of course, as is often the case, enter the sort of, dry academics, and a lot of the academic accounts start posting, say like, actually, it wasn't only the Amabie, there were various prophetic creatures throughout the yokai period, including the Hashihime, and they start sort of trying to have this discussion about the greater past of the Amabie. But in general, to be honest, the internet just didn't care. They just liked Amabie. And so Amabie just went everywhere. It wasn't too long, of course, before the first sexy Amabie girls appeared. Japan gonna Japan. And then more official accounts started noticing this. So it moved from this sort of like fan accounts of people doing all this fan stuff to official accounts. So on March 17th, Mizuki Productions of Mizuki Shigeru, they produced and posted one of Mizuki Shigeru's original artworks of Amabie. This one went especially viral, getting 90,000 different retweets, 185,000 likes. It's also to note that Mizuki Shigeru's is the first person to actually color the Amabie. The original Amabie were all in black and white, and so he sort of like decided this color scheme that you'll see represented. May 1st, phenomenal artist Junji Ito then produces his own Amabie. Junji Ito, one of Japan's most popular modern manga artists, his tweet once again gets phenomenal retweets and phenomenal likes, spreading the message even further of Amabie. American artists started to get in on it as well. This is Usagi Yojimbo artist Stan Sakai. He produced his own version of Amabie along with his character Usagi Yojimbo. Now, a phenomenon this omnipresent on the internet is obviously not going to be ignored by the press. So the press starts posting about it. This is one of the mascots in Japan, Kumo-kun, dressed up as an Amabie. And Japan also started instantly producing products for sale of the Amabie. I mean, that was really impressive to me to watch just how quickly they started getting products out with the Amabie. These things went from awareness to market over a period of months. We had like an Amabie IPA down there. You can see there's Amabie pudding. Someone made this awesome Amabie udon bowl, you know, Amabie sake. Amabie was just escalating everywhere. In April 9th, the Japanese government drafted Amabie and made Amabie the official face of the COVID prevention measures. They did things like over here on the right, you can see the sort of like little coloring book that was made of the original Koarabon. This was handed out to children in order to give them something to do and help them sort of focus on preventative measures and put a sort of like cute face on the disease, or on the disease prevention, I should say. Japan Airlines actually made a plane with the Amabie seal on the bottom that could fly all over Japan, and thus spreading the image of Amabie to everyone. And this one is also one of my favorites because it just cracks me up. Eventually, conspiracy theories started to come out, and you'll see here that there's a post saying how the Amabie looks not unlike the Diamond cruise ship that docked in Japan, and so perhaps there is some sort of, you know, correlation there that the Amabie was in fact the bringer of Corona rather than printer of Corona. I don't know. People are just going to do what they're going to do with folklore, which is one of the things I love. All right. So if we go back into history, this idea of supernatural protection against disease is far longer part of human history than medical protection of disease, right? Because forever we didn't know what disease was. We didn't actually even figure out how to prevent disease till much later than people think. In the 1760s, the first vaccine was developed by Richard Jenner. Richard Jenner, famously, he noticed that milkmaids did not get smallpox. And he thought, well, there's this different kind of disease called cowpox. He's like, well, maybe if the people who get cowpox don't get smallpox. So that was basically how the first smallpox vaccine was created, by him just sort of noticing this, scraping off a little bit of cowpox, injecting people, and now they no longer got smallpox. So it was using a disease to fight a disease. But he still didn't actually know why. It wasn't until the 1880 or 1860, 1864 that Louis Pasteur created germ theory. So pretty late in human existence that we actually knew what caused disease. The prevailing theory before then, a theory that had started at roughly around 4th century BC and lasting all the way up until the 1860s, with this idea of miasma, or just sort of like ill wind. It was just this bad wind that would blow in, and when this bad wind blew in, it would make everyone sick. The way to prevent that was fresh wind, you know, smelling herbs. There were lots of different ways, but this miasma was often personified as a grim reaper or some sort of evil thing to be fought. Now, going back to Japan, in 735 and 737, a smallpox epidemic killed about 1/3 of the population of Japan. And smallpox, as I'm sure everyone who studies history knows, was just a terrible, terrible, terrible disease. It was, you read any sort of history books and you're constantly reading entire villages, entire populations just being wiped out by smallpox. And nobody knew why, right? You would just be there one day and then smallpox would appear, smallpox would kill everyone, and then smallpox would disappear for a period of years until it returned. And you just had no idea why or what it was that you were fighting.
Okay.
During this epidemic, Emperor Shomu had recently, you know, Buddhism had recently been imported into Japan, and Emperor Shomu had come across this idea of the concept of merit and reward in Buddhism, with this idea that, you know, if you had enough merit, you could get some sort of heavenly reward. So he decided that the way
Uh-oh. Okay, I'm sorry, we seem to have temporarily lost our speaker. Perhaps his connection got broken. So while we're waiting, I suppose I could mention that last year I visited the Kasuga Taisha, which is a Shinto shrine in Nara. And I picked up this Emma, which is a votive plaque. And you can see there's a white deer on it on the right. And then on the other side is an Amabie. And this was designed by Nishida, who was the creator of one of the Pikachu, the image of Pikachu. So, it's very cute. And this was a very popular Emma in Nara last year. So, Bob, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
We have to get Zach back.
Oh, I know. I already emailed him.
Okay. While we're waiting, there is a question here. Please bring back the presentation. Yes. So what we're sorry, Morgan, what seems to have happened is that our speaker, who is in Seattle, we are in St. Louis, has somehow his connection got broken. So that's not in our control. We're waiting for him to come back. Yeah, he's not local. So we are currently in St. Louis. That's where I am, and our administrator. And Zach is on the West Coast in a different time zone in Seattle. So unfortunately, there's nothing that we can do at this point except see if he can get back. While we're waiting, I'm a professor of Japanese studies, and I'm currently teaching a course on ghosts, goblins, and Godzilla. And I myself do a lecture on Amabie. So if you want to type in some questions, I can try to ask them. I'm not the expert that Zach Davison is, but since you are interested, I can try to talk about it a little bit while we're waiting. One of the fun things about the fad that I myself was interested in was that people were buying, yarn wigs and costumes for their cats and dressing up their cats as Amabie and then posting photographs on the internet. Okay, looks like we're here. Okay, we're back.
Hey guys.
Okay, we're back.
Welcome back.
So I'm back, and I have a little weird story to tell here that I think is going to be kind of funny, hopefully, about this. One yokai researcher, Komatsu, one time, he was doing a lecture, and somebody asked him, what are yokai? And during the middle of that question, all of the lights suddenly went off. They later found out what the switch was, but he often said that he's like, that little moment when you're in the dark and you're like, what on earth is going on? And you're confused. He's like, that is yokai. So it's always really good when this stuff happens mid yokai lecture. I did have to change spots in my house, but that's be okay. So hold on a second. Let me just get my screen back up and we will be raring to go again. I hope you guys all had fun while I was gone.
While we're waiting, I showed them the Emma from Kasuga Taisha.
Oh, nice.
So yeah.
Okay, so let me get back on screen here.
So we apologize, everyone. We're happy you're staying.
Yes, thank you so much. All right, we back on screen here?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Almost, not quite in present. There we go.
All right, now we got it? Okay.
Yes.
So the emperor commissions this great Buddha. Oops, I went too far. Hold on. Okay, so the emperor creates the great Buddha of Japan with this, and he also fills Japan with these Buddhist temples. With this idea that if you could generate enough merit, if the country can come together and show that they are worshiping correctly, that it will gain this sort of like heavenly protection. I think this is actually interesting in that the quantity was as important as the quality. So you had like the Daibutsu here, but you also had a bunch of little temples built around. And it was almost working in the same way as a vaccine works, and that one person getting the shot doesn't make a difference. A vaccine, you need a lot of people getting the vaccine. And that was the same way it was with the spread of Buddhism, this Buddhist temple, that there was thought if there was just simply enough of it, that they would get this heavenly reward of protection from cholera or protection from smallpox. Didn't really work, but hey, that's because we hadn't learned about disease theory yet. Another idea that happened during the Heian period was the idea of the Yakubyogami. So Yakubyogami was this idea that came in, transmitted over from China, and it was this idea that diseases actually came from these disease gods or these disease, spirits that would wander from town to town and carry this illness with them, this yakubyo. And that's what accounted for towns suddenly catching ill and then getting better later as the Yakubyogami would come in and then the Yakubyogami would exit. The nice thing about this is that for every supernatural reason, there is a sort of supernatural protection as well that could be done. So the Onmyoji of Japan, they were basically the court sorcerers of the Heian period. They created certain rites and rituals to battle against the Yakubyogami. One of the things that places would do, like in front of villages, they would put these warai ningo, or these warao ningos, these sort of like straw dolls that were supposed to keep the Yakubyogami from coming in. Didn't work as well as you would like, but hey. Another thing that happened around the Heian period was this idea of using amulets of protection against disease. Most of these amulets of protection featured Shoki the Demon Queller. Shoki the Demon Queller was this mythical figure that had arrived from China. He had appeared in the dream of an emperor who was ill. Basically, Shoki appeared, was able to banish these Yakubyogami, and the emperor named him gave him this title of sort of like grand doctor or celestial doctor. So Shoki's main job was to quell these Yakubyogami, and they would use these pictures of Shoki to place over your house and put in different places. And it was thought that disease, if they saw this image of Shoki, they would run in fear because Shoki was just so terrifying. Another here was Gazan Daishi. He is originally a monk named Yogen from the Heian period. Yogen was a person who, holy monk who was battling some monsters, and he took on a monstrous form himself in order to battle these Oni. This was then used as these sort of what they call gofuro, which are these prayer amulets that could be used as amulets of protection. And you would use this scary image of Gazan Daishi to protect against any sort of misfortune or illness. And these are still used in Japan today. You can still go get these images of him on prayer scrolls and on amulets to post around. This is actually, I always think that doesn't quite go in the flow of the story I'm telling here, but it's so weird and interesting that I kind of like to mention it. This is the Hari Kikigaki, and this is this book that was written during the Azuchi, the Murayama period, 1568, and it was basically the first real concept of germ theory, I guess, that would happen in Japan, with the idea that instead of this sort of miasma or these gods, you would have these little monsters that lived in different parts of your body, these little sort of what we would call nowadays sort of bacteria. But they were all given individual names and shapes and drawings in this book, as well as specific ways to treat them that usually involved acupuncture or some sort of herbal medicine. If you're a fan of anime or manga at all, this became the series Mushishi. It was the foundation for the comic and TV show Mushishi. All right, now we get into our friends here. In the Edo period, Yogenju appeared. Now, Yogenju translates as prophetic beasts, and nobody really knows where or why the Yogenju first started to appear, but they certainly did appear, and they propagated, and they had a pretty simple appearance thing, right? They had a pretty simple formula where they would sort of appear. tell you what their deal was, and then you needed to sort of like replicate their image, which was unusual. Nothing before this had done it. None of the previous forms had involved that level of replication. Now, the first one appeared in 1819, the first one we know of. This is the Jinja Hime, and it was recorded by the scholar Kato Ebion in his diary Waga Koramo. This picture basically sets the stage for all of the Yogenju that are going to follow, right? So he has this, he's walking on the beach, he sees this sort of like giant sea monster thing. The sea monster pops up and says, there will be an epic, there will be sort of like a good time of prosperity, followed by an epidemic of what they called korori. Korori, oftentimes we think of it in modern terms as cholera, simply because they sound the same, but cholera wasn't actually introduced into Japan until much later. So korori was most likely dysentery, based on what the symptoms we have. But the Jinja Hime said, like, share my picture, and this terrible tragedy can be averted. People did. People created different versions of the Jinja Hime. You can see quite a few of them here, from various paintings to ink drawings, to quadabons, to different images were done of the Jinja Hime. People liked it, people liked the story, and it spread pretty well. I have my personal theory of the Jinja Hime that I'm going to introduce here. I don't know that anyone else agrees with me, but I like it, so I'm going to introduce it. There is a fish called an oarfish, and this is a real fish, and this is a drawing of the fish over on the side here. I personally think that the Jinja Hime looks a lot like the oarfish, including its supposed bladed tail that it had, because it had 3 knives in its tail. It had this face on this body. So my personal guess is that probably he saw an oarfish. Why the oarfish would have spoken to him and given him a prophecy, I have absolutely no idea. But the pattern was established with the Jinja Himes. Number 1, monster appears. Number 2, disaster is predicted. And number 3, claim made that disaster can be diverted by sharing this image. Most of these appeared as what we call kwarabon. Kwarabon were a type of tile block printing. They're different from the wood block printing of the ukiyo-e period. They were carved on the tiles and printed. And kwarabon was really one of Japan's first form of mass media, mass press, right? They could be created quickly, they could be printed in mass form. Kwarabon were really a big game changer in terms of selling media, because of course, prior to this, prior to the access to the printing press and prior to the printing technology, if an artist did a painting, they could sell that painting one time. If they wanted to sell another painting, they would have to paint that painting again. Printing technology allowed an artist to sell the same image multiple times. All the people who made kwarabon, sometimes they would commission some artists. Some of Japan's most famous artists worked on kwarabon. Some were just sort of like schlocky, like any media. I think, you have your really good, nice ones, and you have your kind of junky ones. But the point is that the people who made them were marketing them to the public. They were essentially the equivalent of broadsides that existed in early Britain and America, these quick sheets that could be run out and sold cheaply. People who made the kwarabons learned quite quickly that the topics that sold really well were sort of sensationalist topics. You can see here a head on a stake over there on the left. So pictures of murder sold really well. Crime kwarabons sold really well. Stuff with diagrams and images, all of that sold really well. And also true life encounter with yokai were popular subjects for kwarabon. So if someone had some sort of, encounter with a strange creature in the woods, they could come and they could put that up as a kwarabon, and then they would be printed and sold. And traveling salesmen would often take these kwarabon and move from town to town and sell the different kwarabon and sort of spread the message. This here is another cool yokai kwarabon. I think this is of a Nue here. All right. So here is the sort of ancestor. We're gonna go a little bit down the lineage here of the Amabie till we get to and past the Amabie itself. After the Jinja Hime in 1827, 1829, the Kudabe appears. So the Kudabe, this little monster here, not in the ocean, but appeared in the mountains. And it shows up in the mountains. Someone sees the Kudabe and it does its thing, right? It gives its prophecy. Once again, year of prosperity followed by disaster. Share my image, disaster can be averted. Now, most of these predicted disasters of the Yogenju are very rarely linked to an actual disaster. I mean, Edo period, of course, had its lots of disasters, and most of them actually were not, in fact, plagues. Like famines were actually the great killers of the Edo period. Famines, fires, of course you had your disease, but famines were really the big killers. Like in 1830 and 1840, the Tempo famine just killed extraordinary amounts of people in Japan. There was no food. A lot of people starved to death, billions of people. In 1836, another Yogenju appeared called the Kudan. Now, the Kudan was said to have been born from a regular cow. It looks like you see here down in the picture. It's got a cow body. It's got a little face, and supposedly the Kudan appears, speaks its prophecy, and then dies. Kudan, before the appearance of the Amabie and the coronavirus, Kudan were definitely the most well-known of all the Yogenju. There have been stories of Kudan appearing not only during the Edo period, but stories of Kudan appearing during the Meiji period as well. And quite famously, the last recorded appearance of a Kudan was supposedly during World War II, where a Kudan appeared and prophesied that Japan would lose World War II. There's a lot of different Kudan art out there. It was definitely, of all the ones you'll see, this was the one that took off and really took hold in the Japanese imagination. In 1844, we get the first sort of ancestor of the Amabie, and it's this odd little creature here called the Amabiko. Before I mentioned that some of these kawarabans were done by really professional artists. Some of these kawarabans are really beautiful. Some of them just aren't. Like if you look at the Amabiko here, it's just kind of a scraggly little stick figure of a yokai. Obviously drawn quite rapidly by someone with no particular skill, but it tells the story of now for the first time the Amabie or the Amabiko being associated with water. So this strange three-legged creature rises from the water, does what a Yogenju does, speaks its prophecy, share my image, and all will be averted. In 1846, Our Lady of the Hour finally appears, Amabie. Now, the Amabie, many people think is actually a misheard version of the Amabiko. You'll notice that the Amabiko is written in kanji, so it has meaning. The Amabie is written in katakana, which is an alphabetic or phonetic Japanese version here. So the Amabie sort of has the same 3 feet as the Amabiko. It tells essentially the exact same story. Rises from the ocean. This sort of government officials rows out, to see it. It speaks its prophecy, share my image, and all will be diverted. And then it goes back under the ocean. So the Amabie is essentially the Amabiko with just better character design. Now, unlike the Jinja Hime and the Kudan, we don't really know how popular the Amabie was at the time. I believe there's actually just one existing kawaraban that exists in the University of Kyoto Library collection. So the Amabie didn't really make a big splash. It was one of many of these Yogenju that appeared, and in many, many different forms. In 1852, the Amabiko appeared. This is more of a sort of like hairy gorilla version that showed up. In 1852, we have the Amahiko no Mikoto. This sort of like merged this idea of the Amabie or the Amabiko with the character of Dadama. One thing you'll notice in common that they all have is different types of feet. Like the 3 feet was pretty standard from the first version of the Amabiko. The Amabie also has 3 feet. The Amabito has 3 feet. Amahiko here gets 4 feet, but it's all pretty similar. And then we get the Arie, which is sort of the final form. I guess if you were talking about Pokemon here, this is the final form of the Amabiko. It was this odd little cartoony looking piece here. By this time, the Kawaraban, by the way, there's definitely discussion. Like, we don't know how much of them were done for humor's sake, how much they were taken seriously. Probably like many things, you know, some people took them seriously. Some of them were just artistic designs to be passed out. Some of them were probably just kind of funny. Most of the people, like, especially like the earlier ones like the Amabie and the Audie, you know, they were declared hoaxes at the time. There was details that were not historically accurate within the story itself. So I don't think too many people took them seriously as real encounters, but they certainly might have. And I think some of the earlier ones were given a little bit more credence than these later ones. So while these yogenju are being passed around, I would want to talk about one other thing about the idea of art as amulets against protection. So in 1855, Tokyo suffers this massive earthquake, you know, all these fires break out, and this idea of these namazu-e begin to appear. Now, the namazu-e is this giant catfish, and there was this folk legend that this giant catfish lived underneath Japan, and when the catfish would thrash around, that's what caused all of the accidents. And so what you see here are all these people trying to hold down this giant catfish. And namazu-e became popular as well. You have lots of images of these, and these were used essentially as earthquake and fire protections, because if you get enough people holding down the giant catfish, then it would not thrash around and it would not cause all the earthquakes. Like I said, there's quite a few of these that appear at the time. You know, this one, I forget exactly what year this one is. They're pretty cool, and they're all these ones are also, unlike a lot of the Kwarabons you can see here, that like now we've moved into woodblock printing. So these namazu-es were actually legitimately beautiful works of art that were being created. They were not the cheap Kwarabon. They were done in full color. You know, artists could really lean in on creating nice namazu-e to pass around. This one's great because you've got some oni in the background as well. You've actually got two catfish here while everyone's trying to hold down these thrashing catfish. That is a flying catfish. That one's pretty cool too. All right. Oh, I went too good on my reveal. Okay, so one of the fun things about this personification of disease and personification of disasters, it's something that obviously we still do into the modern age. You know, this was Godzilla was very famously essentially the personification of the atomic bomb when it dropped in. I mean, the first movie was obviously not all the existing movies, but it is a phenomenon that is pretty traditional in history, and we still do to this day. So yogenju kept going on in 1857. The yogenju or Yogen no Tori appeared. This was a yogenju that had two heads, basically a bird with a white head and a black head. It followed the same thing, spoke its prophecy, announced disaster unless you spread its image. I often think that this idea of the yogenju appearing about the exact same time that the Kwarabon and mass media appeared certainly have something in common, because one of the messages of the yogenju is that you must spread its image, right? You must propagate its image, which is great for people trying to sell that image. For people who want to sell you various copies of this image, the fact that the bird itself is telling you, or the beast itself is telling you, you must have more and more of my pictures, that is a very convenient thing for someone selling it. So I personally believe there must be some sort of correlation there. It's a very difficult thing to prove as far as you go back into history, but just if you knowing what I know of human nature, that would be my guess as to why these yogenju use that technique of, you know, more and more of my image, more and more of my image. Although it does also relate back to this concept of the Buddhist temple, with this idea with, you know, the more merit you show, the more heavenly reward you'll gain. So the more that you share this image of this yokai, the more that you share the image of this supernatural creature, the more of its benefit it will gain, right? And once again, that works exactly the same way that modern vaccines do, that the more they propagate, the more effective they are. By the late Edo period, by the way, the yogenju got to get a little bit ridiculous. This one here is one of the last of the Edo period yogenju. This is the tsukabe. As you can see here, the tsukabe is clearly done for humorous purposes. It is a parody of earlier yogenju. The tsukabe warns of an upcoming terrible epidemic of farting, and that if you do not share the tsukabe's image, all of Japan will be covered in farts. So once again, by now, clearly these are being done simply for comedy effect rather than as actual talismans against protection. All right, moving into later Edo period, these are the Hashike. They started making these measles pictures when there was a measles epidemic. These were done once again in the same way. These are obviously Edo period, or these are obviously woodblock
Yes.
printings that are done with nice multiple colors. And the Hashike, were once again put up as protection against this disease of measles that was not very well understood. Boom, the end of the Edo period. So in 1954, Admiral Perry comes with his black ships and he opens up Japan from the Edo period. The Edo period is over, and Japan is now introduced into modern science, modern learning. New concepts come in, new concepts of science come in, and Japan rapidly evolves in its technology, and it learns about things like vaccines. It learns about things like modern medicine, and it also sort of understands that its past use of the supernatural is not as effective as modern medicine. So Japan transitions quite rapidly. In the Meiji period in 1882 is, I think, sort of the last hurrah of the Yogenju, in that there was an epidemic of cholera. This pamphlet was produced, the Amabiko Nyudo, and it told the sort of similar thing. If you sell it, if you post this Amabiko Nyudo, it will serve as a talisman against this outbreak of cholera. The Japanese government actually came down and tried to repress the selling of this print because they thought that it would prevent actual scientific preventative measures that were taking place at the time. And so they wanted to stop people from relying on folk cures such as talismans of various yokai, using new modern medicine. All right, also in the Meiji period, 1886, we have these outbreaks of cholera. Disease once again being personified. This is cholera as being personified as a nue, which is this sort of like chimeric creature that has the head of a tiger, the body of a tanuki, normally the tail of a snake, although here it has the tail of the snake as well. And at this time, these creatures in this personification were being used mostly for commerce. Once again, this is actually an ad for a plum vinegar that was being sold as a miracle cure. And you can see over here, there's this bottle of plum vinegar firing out like a cannon to protect you against the nue, protect you against this thing. And similar to what was going on with these older Kwarabans and these older ukiyo-es, but now just clearly being done for commercial purposes. In 1918, when the Spanish flu came out, it infected a third of the population of Japan. And these books were printed out about the Spanish flu, about how you could take protective measures. So we see the Spanish flu is once again personified as these little sort of demons. These are actually the Yakubyogami again, and they're spreading disease. And this is showing how the mother coughing is spreading disease to her child, to the drinks, to the food that they're eating, and how you could prevent yourself against the Spanish flu. In these ones, they actually recruited an old Japanese folkloric character called My Lord Bag of Rice, and he became the one battling these Yakubyogami of the Spanish flu. Oh, there he is. Yep, there's more Spanish flu. All right. So now that we've done this sort of tour, I guess, of all of these creatures. You had the Yogenju, you had all of these different types of prophetic creatures. And then why the Amabie? That was a question that I asked when this was all going on. What is it about the Amabie that took off? Because the Amabie was pretty obscure. Not that many people actually knew about the Amabie prior to the outbreak of COVID. I mean, some yokai enthusiasts knew about it. Obviously, Mizuki Shigeru had done an illustration of the Amabie in his yokai encyclopedias. Amabie had appeared as a character in one of his TV shows, but so had many hundreds of others of yokai. And when this outbreak happened, people just latched onto the Amabie, more so than sort of the Jinja Hime, for example, that also appeared. And I believe that most of the reasons for the Amabie's success, as opposed to the other different Yogenju that could have appeared, is that it's cute. the character design of the Amabie is absolutely darling. It has these long flowing, lady lovely locks, hair that you can draw. It has this lovely pattern, pink and blue scales. It has this bizarre beak. It has enough of the monstrous that it is clearly a monster, but it also is just prettier than any of the other Yogenju. It's certainly prettier than the Kudabe. It's prettier than the Kudan by far, even though the Kudan had previously been, the beast of choice for epidemics. But Amabie, people just latched onto it. You could make really darling Amabie. It also wasn't that hard to draw. I think that's also helpful. So even amateur artists could sit at home and they could draw their Amabie. And it created this sort of like spark of joy, I think, in a time that people really needed joy, when people were feeling isolated, when they were feeling scared and alone, and they were sitting in their houses. And then they could get on the internet and they could see this global population of people using this very approachable and friendly character as a way to make themselves feel better. And then they could participate in that. That's also really a big difference with the 2020, the COVID outbreak of Amabie, as opposed to the earlier Edo period Amabies, is that you were encouraged to create your own Amabie. You weren't being encouraged to necessarily purchase a Kwarabon to hang over your house. It was a more active engagement of the Amabie. And it really gave people this sense of like connectedness and hope in a time that they needed something like that. And also like a world connection, that you could see someone in France post their Amabie, you could see someone in China post an Amabie, someone in Japan, someone all over the world. And then you could go and you could do your own Amabie yourself. This was a series of postcards that I did with my friend Lily Chen that we made, so that you could actually send postcards to people of an Amabie as a way of feeling connected. And there was so many things that we did over the time of COVID, like things like all of a sudden people were making sourdough bread, or people were having these shared hobbies. And the Amabie really contributed to that shared experience. I thought it was also, so this was another thing, is that there was always people were sort of like, speculating on the end of the Amabie, like when would it finish? And then like a few newspapers were talking about, the Yoga no Tori, is it going to replace the Amabie? Are people going to go crazy for that? But it really didn't work that way. The Amabie stayed the creature of contagion, the one that we all focused on. It actually eventually was found its way into Shinto shrines, where it was placed as a talisman that people could collectively pray to help relieve themselves, and to help protect the country against the dreaded disease. So what time are we at, Laura?
It's 5 minutes to 4. So
okay,
we can wrap it up and take questions.
That is the wrap up right there. So that worked out great. I had to move away, so I kind of lost my clock here. So I'm glad that the timing worked out pretty good for that. So this is just some more of my information. If you want to learn more about me, this is my website. This is my Blue Sky account. I don't really use Twitter anymore for reasons, but other than that, yeah, let's move into taking the questions.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Zach. This was really fascinating. And I think for me, what was really, what I really appreciated were two things. And one, the way that you tracked the early fascination with Amabie on social media, right when COVID hit, so trying to dig deep to find out, how did this huge fad come about? So that's really great research. And for a lot of us, it also helps us see how these fads actually get spread.
Yeah,
so that was great.
Yeah. Thank you.
And then also, I love that you gave so much historical and cultural context about how images have, from at least the Nara period, have been used as protection. So I think that's a good context. I mean, the idea of Amabie image as protection is just part of this long lineage.
Yeah.
So I think that was great. We do have a few questions, so I'll mention, and some of them are quite interesting. They're from people who obviously have seen Japanese popular culture and wondering if there's some resonance here or tie-in. And so one is asking, was the horror movie The Ring loosely based on Amabie? I'm wondering because it will go after you unless you share the image. So there is some similarities that I've
So-
noticed.
That is a really interesting question, and not on the Amabie specifically, because once again, the Amabie was mostly fairly obscure until the rise of COVID. But that movie, the Ring, or as it's called in English, I guess it's called in English is Ringu, which is weird because it's actually uses the Japanese and English, but in Japanese they use the English version, but that happens sometimes. That's based on this concept, this Japanese concept called tatari, which is this sort of like curse, where when you enter a cursed area, it can track you down, as well as, yes, the mimetic quality of sharing an image as a way of protection, right? There's some part of the Yogenju in there, and the fact that sharing this image grants you protection. But the difference, I think, in the Ring is that it's passing on the curse. It's not creating that universal crowd immunity that these original Yogenju were doing, because that was really the big point of the Yogenju, is that if you had enough people sharing its image, you would all gain the same immunity, right? It was like a shield wall. You needed everyone hoisting their shield in order to create all of the protection. But then again, Ring is a horror story. So they twist that a little bit and add a little bit more of an evil element to it. Whereas if you don't share it, then you are the one who dies. So yeah, there is definitely some basis there. I wouldn't say the Amabie specifically, but with this concept of the Yogenju and this idea of sharing an image as a method of protection.
And a sort of similar question from someone else is the Namazue, for those who forgot, that's the catfish drawings. Is the Namazue similar to the giant worm in the movie Suzume?
You guys are doing deep cuts here. Yes, I mean, yes, it is. So the Namazu, I actually think of the Namazu as one of the early, I guess, I don't know, prototypes of what would later be kaiju, these idea of these giant monsters. A lot of people, and I've heard this said a few times, where people are like, oh, kaiju were an original creation with Godzilla and they didn't exist before. But if you actually look through Japanese history, the Namazu was one of those. It was this giant beast of destruction that could only be held down by the mass of Japan coming together to hold it down. And so you will see that replication of the Namazu, in things like kaiju egg movies, in basically anything that you have a giant monster. And it's interesting because it requires all of society sort of like coming together, as protection. And that's not that different from the Amabie pictures as well in the Order Buddhist, is it requires everyone coming together to focus as a group in order to prevent this attack from this monster. There's no single hero that can deliver you. Everyone has to do it.
That's great. So there, definitely is similarity. And again, it's the kind of cultural system here. And this is a different kind of question. And you did sort of talk about it, but I'll read it anyway.
Yeah.
Has there been any other major diseases besides smallpox and COVID associated with Amabie?
So, I mean, even with the Amabie, and that's the other thing, like the original Yogenju, they were much more associated with famine than disease, because famine was a worse problem. Like you'll notice that the original Yogenju, they promise a bumper crop. That is always right in there. Lots of food. The concept of illness, like the associated with illness. So another thing that I should have mentioned a little bit clearer there is that when Japan made contact with the West, they brought a bunch of diseases with them, right? Like cholera didn't really exist in Japan until the West came in, and we brought cholera. We were like, here's medicine, and here's disease as well, because we're bringing them all in together. And the earlier ones, like smallpox, was running rampant through Japan, but most of them were famine based, and so you do see a lot more food related protection rather than disease related protection. But when cholera or when corona happened, and it was our first real modern experience with an epidemic. I mean, that's the other interesting about reading history books, is that so much of history, people have had to deal with so many epidemics. Like that was just a part of life, Oh, I woke up today, oh, my city's gone, they're all dead. A third of Japan dead. Is mind blowing. And since we grew up post-vaccination era, it's just so hard for us to grasp. Like I remember my mother telling me about how when she was a girl, she got scarlet fever. And so they hung signs on her house saying scarlet fever, and her entire house was quarantined, But I experienced nothing like that. And so corona was really our first true life experience with an epidemic, and not nearly as bad as they used to be. It wasn't like smallpox. It was bad, but like we just never experienced before. And so this idea of grasping onto the supernatural in a time of uncertainty, it's a very human thing to do.
Yeah.
And so we grasped onto the Amabie because the Amabie was there and present. And I do think, once again, like I said before, I do think that it was because it was so cute. I mean, it just made you happy to look at Amabie, in a way that very
Right.
few other things did.
Well, actually, I mean, one of the functions of kawaii or cute has always been to, mediate between negative things or unpleasant things. So that's why we find cute posters for disease prevention in Japan,
Yep.
and cute posters of, etiquette and so on. So it is a great mediating device.
Yeah.
There's another question here. Is there a kaiju version of Amabie?
I mean, yeah. I mean, like one of the pictures that I showed, because people people morphed and evolved the Amabie. So one of the pictures I showed was a piece of art. I forget who did it, but it was great. It was this giant kaiju Amabie, and it was breathing fire and blasting the coronavirus to pieces. So, oh yeah, people have gone all over town with the Amabie. And yeah, I mean, because you could do all sorts of stuff with it. You could create these really cute things. You can create little dolls, or you can create these really scary stuff. It just, as a character, and that's because its actual story is pretty limited. Its actual story is pretty small, which leaves a lot of room for you to just pack in whatever you want on the Amabie.
Yeah, I think if you had more time, I mean, I think there could be a whole lecture just on the products and
Oh gosh, yeah.
people doing cosplay, having their pets do cosplay, and so the way that people have engaged with and played with this character is really amazing and really interesting to see.
As well as just the rapidity of the speed. I think that says something about the connection of the internet, how everything just happens on a faster scale. I mean, when people went in on Amabie, it was just instant. Like, I don't know how these companies turned out products so quickly. They're like, you're selling a beer, and like within like weeks you have an Amabie beer on the market. Like, that was just amazing. I could see people at crafts fairs and things like that, but actual official, fully produced, manufactured products were just out at lightning speed.
Yeah. So if the audience, we have time for maybe one more question before ending, but someone did ask, will this be recorded and available later? And the answer is yes. It will. There will be the recording will be on the UMSL Global YouTube channel, so you can always revisit if you didn't catch some of the great history that Zach gave us earlier.
Along with the scary part where I lost connection, because, as I said, that's the best part of, whenever I try to describe yokai to people, that's it. That's it right there. That weird feeling of uncertainness where you're not sure what's going on and you're confused, and there it is.
Okay, somebody did post something in the chat. Oh, so for those of you who are still here, if you click on the chat button, you can find the link to the YouTube channel. So we have that available. So I guess that, do you have any last comments, Zach, before we end today?
Just thanks everyone for coming and listening. Once again, I find the Amabie absolutely fascinating, and I also find it fascinating I'm still talking about the Amabie, because I honestly, because this was like, I think like our first, hopefully my last pandemic. I don't know, man. I don't know what's going to happen from here. I had no idea that it would last as long as it was going to last. I thought at first that the Amabie was going to be a bit of ephemera of something that happened once in the past, and maybe later on people would keep writing about it as a thing that happened. But we're still in the pandemic. It has never really ended, and maybe never will end. And so that has been, so the power of the Amabie still once again goes on and is required and necessary.
Yeah, I felt the same way. I thought that it was simply a kind of, transitory fascination, but we are 3 years on, and we're, there's still products being created. And I think especially some of the Shinto shrines and the Buddhist
Mhm.
temples, I've noticed they're doing a lot more sort of omikuji with
Yep.
the imagery on it, or like the Emma that I showed
Oh, nice.
people.
Mhm.
And so they're really invested in the image, and
Mhm.
so I don't see it going away very soon either.
No, it's
Um,
really taken its stage amongst the major well-known yokai. In fact, my mother says the Amabie is her favorite yokai, which always cracks me up because my mother never knew the word yokai before I started studying it. And I'm like, Mom, it's the only yokai you know. She's like, yeah, but the Amabie is great. I love the Amabie, you know. So,
Yeah,
and I think
exactly.
yeah, it gives something, you know, once again, it's just so friendly, and it's something that people can really has a lot of appeal to it. And like, yeah, if you're sick or if you're feeling bad and you go to a shrine, you get the Amabie plaque and you write your little name on it, you know, and write your prayer on it. I think we'll be seeing that for many, many years to come.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, thank you, Zach. It was
Yep.
a wonderful talk, and I'm sorry we had a little interruption, but these things
Yep.
happen,
These
and
things happen.
we
Yep.
really appreciate your time
Sure.
to share your
Yep.
knowledge with us.
All
Thank
right.
you so much.
Thank you so much. Bye bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.